Good afternoon, students of Chinese YMCA Secondary School. We are now going to play you the news clip from yesterday.
Good evening. A big day in the world of politics and for Hong Kong as Chief Executive Carrie Lam delivered her first policy address to the Legislative Council. Now, setting the tone for the next 5 years, Lam targeted education, youth, livelihoods, and livability in Hong Kong. From the get-go, she broke with tradition and only presented highlights of the major policies in under an hour. She described the style of her policy address as speaking of determination, boldness, and innovation, as well as a conscientious effort to address the needs of the people. The CE justified all the spending she was doing by noting the government's fiscal reserves were in excess of $1 trillion. Quote, wealth derived from the community to benefit the community. Lam wrapped up by saying Hong Kongers had not lost their intrinsic advantages. Hong Kong people are still brilliant, she said, and the Hong Kong spirit has not been eroded. With home prices hitting record highs in Hong Kong, the chief executive announced plans to help different income groups own their property. Elmi Leung takes a closer look at Carrie Lam's starter home scheme to help middle-class families.
Among all livelihood issues, Carrie Lam described the housing problem as the most challenging, formidable and complex. The chief executive plans to tackle this by focusing on home ownership. While public rental units will remain as a safety net for low-income earners, authorities are hoping to get better-off tenants to buy their own flats under the Green Form subsidised home ownership scheme. Around 4,000 new public flats in Fo Tan will be converted and put up for sale under the scheme late next year. Then there are starter homes targeting middle-class families. The first batch of 1,000 starter homes will be built on Anderson Road in Kwun Tong. Applicants must be local residents who have lived here for at least 7 years and have never owned any property. The monthly income must not exceed $34,000 for singleton applicants and $68,000 for households. Carrie Lam is planning to incorporate provisions in land leases to get private developers to design and build more of these flats. Further details won't be announced until mid-2018, and that's got some legislators worried.
Is it a way that the government is helping the developer to make use of these idle land to pay the very low premium price in order to revitalize all these land and from illegal use to legal use?
The eligibility of starter homes and the pricing and the sort of transfer mechanisms are all policy issues for the government. At the end of the day, it is the government who will dictate the policy and just ask the developers to help to build it under a certain scheme.
While bank employee Jasmine Wong is eligible to apply for starter homes, she's unable to make up her mind when key information such as the sale price and down payment figures are missing. The chief executive seems more confident in materializing policies listed in her maiden policy address.
I have a reputation in government and in society at large that I am a doer. I am pretty good in executing things.
The chief executive is also relying on a newly formed task force on land supply to engage with the public early next year on different options to boost land supply. Hopefully, the exercise will achieve the broadest consensus on how best to move forward. Elmi Leung, TVB News.
Carrie Lam is also proposing a subsidy for commuters who spend more than $400 on public transport a month. She also vowed to push forward with co-location arrangements for the high-speed rail link. Winna Wong reports.
Hong Kong cannot afford to be complacent. That's according to Chief Executive Carrie Lam when she began talking about transport services in the city. She said the government continues to improve transportation services, like building new roads, expanding the railway network, and implementing measures to alleviate traffic congestion. Lam also wants to make traveling in the city less of a financial burden for locals. Today, she announced that the Transport and Housing Bureau would look at a non-means-tested public transport fare subsidy scheme for commuters. The plan would benefit anyone who spends more than $400 a month on transportation. The government wants to subsidize 25% of any expense after that $400 mark. The subsidy would be capped at $300 a month and covers anything from the MTR, franchised buses, to ferries and trams. Lam says more than 2 million commuters will benefit. But the scheme will need to be approved by the Legislative Council. The government hopes to launch it within a year once it gets passed.
The scheme will be simple and easy to understand and will not require any application.
For now, the government plans to hand out the rebates through the Octopus card system. People will be able to enjoy the subsidy if they touch their cards at certain Octopus card machines. Lam also touched upon the controversial co-location arrangement for the Guangzhou-Shenzhen-Hong Kong Express rail link. She said after the proposal undergoes alleged commotion debate later this month, the government will take forward the follow-up tasks of the arrangement. This includes seeking approval from the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress and commencing the local legislative process. Wenna Wang, TVB News.
The CE also warned Hong Kong faced grave challenges and must develop its economy to cope with them. She unveiled tax relief policies to boost competitiveness and a plan to expand the city's convention facilities. Anne-Marie Sim with that story.
In the face of competition from other economies as well as the rise of protectionism in recent years, Hong Kong is facing increasingly grave challenges. We must develop a high value-added and diversified economy. That was the CE's warning for Hong Kong today, as she announced more support for its small and medium-sized enterprises by cutting company profits tax to 8.25% for the first $2 million in earnings. Profits after that would be taxed at the current 16.5%. In a bid to encourage research and development by enterprises, the CE proposed a 300% tax reduction for companies spending $2 million on R&D. To boost Hong Kong's status as a world-class leader in hosting conventions and exhibitions, Lam announced plans to expand the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Centre in Wan Chai. 3 government buildings next to it will be demolished and a new wing will be built. By doing this, Lam went against her predecessor Leung Chun-ying's plan to tear down the Wan Chai Sports Ground to build a new expo facility. But the sports facility may not be out of the woods yet, with Lam saying plans to develop it were only on hold for the time being. Lam added that with $1 trillion in the government's coffers, Hong Kong was well positioned to use it to benefit the community, as it was wealth derived from the community.
All the initiatives in the policy address are financially sustainable because they are all calculated and funded in the internal government mechanism called resource allocation. So it's not just a question of me as a CE imposing certain fiscal demands on other government bureaus. We sat together and we discussed and we felt that these measures are sustainable.
Anne-Marie Sim, TVB News.
Carrie Lam also introduced measures to boost aid for the needy and improve people's livelihood. Such measures include improving the low-income working family allowance and preparing for the implementation of a higher old-age living allowance. Caleb Leung has more.
One of the major poverty alleviation measures is the low-income working family allowance. It will be renamed as the Working Family Allowance on April 1, 2018. According to the CE, the renamed scheme will be a significantly enhanced version of the original one. The eligibility requirements will be relaxed, such as allowing singletons to apply. The subsidy amount will also be increased. For example, a 4-person household with 2 children whose members work no less than 192 hours in total a month but earn $19,000 or less will receive a monthly subsidy of $3,200. That's a 25% increase when compared with the current subsidy of $2,600. As for the elderly, Lam proposed implementing a higher old-age living allowance in mid-2018. The allowance will provide a monthly allowance of $3,435 to eligible beneficiaries. The measure will take retrospective effect from May 1st this year. Caleb Leung, TVB News.